We are we are live on Facebook and we are recording. So I'm going to get started. Hello everyone and welcome to today's growth conversation on Hope Story Change, the importance of narrative in pushing forward the change we most want. Today's presenters are Dr. Maria Sirois and Dr. Rob Fazio, who will introduce themselves shortly. At this time, I want to let you know that we will record the first portion of the call today so we can reach more people who aren't on the call. We're also posting live on Facebook. During the second half of the call, we will open it up for discussion and questions, and I will turn off the recording and the Facebook Live at that time. A quick reminder that this is an educational community-based session. It is not therapy and is intended to be a discussion that has takeaways we can learn from. On holdthedoor.com, you can find additional resources. Everyone will be muted and you can unmute yourself during the second half of the session. If you have any questions and want to write them down, please use the chat function in Zoom and either send them publicly or to me directly as the host. We will then read them during the second half of the discussion. Also, set your display to speaker view in the upper right-hand side of your screen to get the best viewing experience. So for those just joining us, welcome to the discussion, and I will now turn it over to Dr. Rob Fazio. Rob?
Thank you, Hummel. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome to new participants. Definitely excited to be with Dr. Sirois. I've been practicing that name all week. It's very fancy. And I'll give her a proper introduction in a moment. Just a few things that we'll reiterate that we do each time we have these growth conversations. We know our focus is on growth through adversity. We're all experiencing adversity at this point with this COVID-19 crisis. And we're here to remind you of the power of being positive and taking action and being skills, and that we can all find strength as we're going through this experience as well as growth. And those of you familiar with Hold the Door, you know that we always like to start with a strength to remind us that we're stronger than we actually know or feel. So I want to do two things with this. One is I want to acknowledge strength and I want to send strength. And in particular to parents that have children that are homeschooled. So my daughter Reese is 4 years old. So we really don't have to worry about the homeschooling aspect, because I just give her an iPad and I say, here, and wheat thins, right, Maria? I give her wheat thins. We're allowed. Maria and I did a podcast together recently, and there was loud crunching going on, and they were trying to figure out what it was, and it was because my daughter was sitting next to me eating wheat thins. I should have brought some for this evening.
Right out of the box.
Right
out of the box.
And so, in talking with my clients and friends, I'm realizing the difficulty in the balancing of educating children and trying to teach them during this, not knowing when you're going back to school. So just wanted to let people know that a lot of people are experiencing that same, pressure. So just a reminder to realize that none of us are feeling okay or great in these moments as we go through this. And it's just important to know that it's okay if you feel like, okay, this isn't going great. And hopefully we'll all have ways to get our kids. I'm finding in my house that adults are no longer fun or cool to talk with. So I've got to deal with that situation soon. So a big part of our Hold the Door theme is as we're flattening the curve, which, by the way, in the Northeast, we've been doing a really good job. New York are seeing numbers go down. Philadelphia hospitals are actually doing fairly well, which is good. That wasn't the message a month ago. So, cautiously optimistic, which is probably something we'll talk about in a few minutes here. But just a reminder, on holdthedoor.com, there are free resources. There's a self-awareness tool to get a sense of how you are doing in relation to our 8 resources that we found help buffer the impact of crisis and adversity. And then the most simple strategy we use is learn, laugh, love, spending 15 minutes a day doing that. I will share with you what one of the things we're doing on our home on a daily basis. related to love. This is our new pup. We just adopted him on Thursday. His name is Cannoli Fazio, and he loves to steal sneakers, sleep, and lick his 4-year-old sister. So it's a lot of fun and enjoyment. So I'm going to stop sharing here. This evening, we're going to finish up by 5:45 because Maria has another engagement that she needs to be. She's a busy and a popular person. So I'll tell you a little about Maria. She is a psychologist. She has a background in positive psychology. She's an expert in resilience. She's an expert in storytelling. She's also an expert in leadership and works internationally with clients, premier clients, Fortune 500 clients, and takes her resilience expertise into the workplace, which I think is obviously really prevalent and needed. And if I was a betting man, I would bet Maria's days have gotten much more busy during this COVID-19 crisis than they were previously, because I know that she's in demand. So we're very grateful, Maria, for you joining us this evening, and looking forward to having conversation. I should also mention that she's an author of a book, which I am working through now, which is Happiness After Loss. And it's interesting in reading it. So much of what she talks about is so connected to what we do at Hold the Door and Believe in. And let me start by saying the reason why I wanted to have Maria come on, not because of her academic credentials, although that's helpful. It's more of the energy and the way that she goes about how she interacts with people. Maria, we have one of our people that started to work with us, Dr. Micah McCreary, who's one of our leaders. And he's a guy where we just can hop on a call and jam and do good. And I feel the same way about you.
No.
So welcome to Hold the Door. Thank you for being here. And why don't you start just by telling a little bit about, like, what you do and how you're doing tonight and what's going on, anything you want to start with, and then we'll go from there.
So thank you for holding the door for me to enter into your incredibly kind, warm, funny, real, authentic community. So a long time ago, almost 30 years ago, I was working in a pediatric oncology ward with kids facing cancers. And there was a teenager who had been wrestling with brain cancer, and her time was done, and she knew it, and she was being sent home to die at home, which was her request. And on the last few days in hospital, she had a very specific request for our therapy together, which was that I help her come up with the list. And the list was who was going to get what of her stuff. And this was one of the most joyful, laughter-filled, because she had something like 11 siblings, and there was a lot of issues around who was going to get which stuffed animal. But she entered it from this place, Rob, of incredibly beautiful, exuberant clarity that this was going to be her legacy. And I would go home at night and sob, and I'd go there the next day, and she was ready for page 2 of the list, kind of thing. Like, every barrette mattered, right? Every journal book mattered. Every record album mattered, or there was probably DVDs and CDs by then. It all mattered. And so when I was thinking about coming on tonight, she came to mind. I haven't thought of her in a long time. And she came to mind, and I thought, geez, that is exactly what Rob and the gang are doing, is finding a way to be in the hard moments with that kind of zesty, quirky, authentic exuberance. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you. I over the years too, I think people like you and I have to realize that because we're okay with the yuck and the awkwardness, we don't realize other people, right? So you and I can have a conversation about death and all this stuff where it's normal. And I think what I forget is sometimes it's not as normal for other people. So part of my hope is, what I love about the COVID-19 crisis is it made people realize we are not invincible, and suffering is part of life, as terrible as that sounds, but we know that suffering is a pathway towards enjoyment. And I know you do a lot of work and have a background in positive psychology. So connect the two for us. How do you, and I noticed in your book, you talk about paradoxes, right? So
Yeah.
tell us a little about like, how in the world can we be positive when we're dealing with like, we don't know when we're going to see people again?
Yeah. So positive psychology essentially asks one question: who are we at our best, and how do we get more there? Whether that's who are we at our best as a leader, as a partner, as a storyteller, as a child, like who are we at our best? And what is it that cultivates that sort of capacity to thrive and do well and be yourself in life? Resilience is the territory of adapting well to stress or trauma or loss. And where they come together is this really powerful question that, like you said, every single person is experiencing right now, which is, how can I be a little bit more my better self in the midst of crazy town? This is just crazy town everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So that's where the two come together. And narrative, just to get back to one of our themes for today, narrative
Which hopefully we get to.
helps us hold seeming opposites. It's why I love story, because everything can be included and everything eventually makes sense.
Yeah. So let's, I love that you said crazy town, is because I think that we have a tendency, I'll speak for America, meaning that I understand American culture best. I think we have a culture in America, maybe particularly Northeast, to be control freaks. And it's like, oh, we're going to get through this. We're all in this together. It's like, dude, nobody in the world knows what's going on right now. We think we know, but we don't. And guess what? We have to deal with that and figure out ways that we're going to distract ourselves from always focusing on the negatives and moving to positives. So I want to get to the story in a moment. The story is a narrative in a moment. Before that, can you just share with us your connection to loss and what got you interested in working with loss and dealing with grief?
So when I was in graduate school, I had to write a dissertation, and I wanted to write a dissertation on spirituality and psychotherapy, where the two meaning-making systems intersected. And I thought, totally intellectually, you know what? If I work with people who are ill, kind of questions of life and death and meaning are going to come up. So it's like, it'll be the right like petri dish, right? So that fourth year of grad school, I applied for internships in hospitals, and I was lucky enough to get one at Dana-Farber in Boston. And 2 days into the internship, my supervisor said, "Why did you choose this again?" And I said, "Oh, because I'm writing this dissertation." And she goes, "Yeah, and exactly how much cancer have you had in your life?" And I start listing all the early deaths in my family to cancer, starting with my grandfather when I was 3, and all. And it's like, oh, like unconsciously, I needed to figure something out. And the story of my life at that moment, at 29 or 30, wasn't quite big enough to hold what I was trying to understand.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So this trying to understand how there can be a 17-year-old who knows how to die graceful. Like, how is that possible? And how is it possible to have a family who can handle that? Right. So.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally get it. It's funny that you said, like, they asked you that question. There's a woman in Boston, Jen Page, who's a psychologist. So she, so the great thing about Hold the Door is there's like sequencing. So there's Deb Roach was at Penn. She interviewed me for the internship. She got involved with Hold the Door afterwards. And then I had to interview the next pre-doctoral intern, woman named Jen Page. And so we grabbed like a coffee together. We're talking about it. And she's like, "Oh, I'm really interested in this whole other stuff." I'm like, "Who'd you lose and when and how?" And she's like, "Whoa." and her story is amazing. She actually wrote in our workbook, we have stories of loss to growth. Her dad always walked the dog, and it was the winter. And they found out the dog went on the ice, and he went to get it and fell through. And random, but she found so much. Hold the Door has benefited so much from her experience with loss. We're also, connected to cancer as well, which so many people are. My sister Lauren, who's on the line now, she had stage 4, large B cell lymphoma, got through. And I really think having having a story to tell yourself and hear helps with that. So you're the expert on story. I have no training in story or narrative whatsoever. I could teach about it if you want, but, but I know nothing. So I want to turn it over to you to let us know anything and everything we need to know. And if I don't answer a question that's important, please share with us. So I want to turn it over to you to help us learn
Yeah.
power of stories, how it connects, and what we can do with them.
Yeah. So a couple of key things about story and then why it's so important right now. Story helps us make sense of a million pieces of data. It enables us often to sort of imagine a slightly better future or a slightly better self. Like it gives us a template for how to behave, especially stories of exemplars, right? And exemplars can be ordinary people like Jen Page, who navigates an early loss and surprising sudden tragic loss of her dad and finds out, how to be in the world in a life-giving way, right? So those exemplar stories help us sort of see who we might be and what's possible out there. And then there are stories that are the more sort of stories of redemption or recovery from loss and failure or missteps, mistakes. I was telling a group of people last night, I got married right out of like, what was I thinking? It lasted 2 years. Now it feels like it was just a blip, but then it was my entire universe. And noting now, so many years later, how I managed to sort of incorporate that into a story that still has some positive regard for myself. It's been an amazing journey. So they're the stories of failure and recovery or redemption, stories of exemplars. Today, what we need stories that, no matter what they are, how big or small, that activate that kind of sense of positivity within us. And by positivity, I absolutely don't mean happiness or, cheer. What I mean is things like ease and contentment and tiny bits of hope and grounded optimism and love, right? So not necessarily the delightful things, but the things that actually center us in that place where it's okay. Like I can get through this. I can get through this.
Yeah.
Right?
And so if someone is having a tough time and knows nothing about creating a story, what do they do? How do they use story to help them?
Yeah. So 2 approaches. One is to look back in your own past. You sort of want to mine the past for the gold and remember times that were difficult in the past and how you navigated them and how you've grown from that time. So this is a story of your own history, right?
Yeah.
You're sort of doing self-research. So we can use the past to sort of inform the present in a positive, life-giving way. The other is to just simply notice the stories that actually are lifting you. We're being inundated, social media, newspapers, news online, etc. And there's always a moment where either your breath gets taken away or the hair on your arms is raised or you think, oh, I'm so glad I read this, or I'm so glad I heard this. To notice what those stories are, because they're like keys to the meaning that's relevant to you right now. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. So you're saying have people look for the stories that connect to them, and maybe right now slant them towards the positive and strength, because that might help you in some way. Is that
Exactly. So positivity, when we're under stress, positivity creates respite. It gives us a break from the stress. That's why I love your model. I wrote it down. Learn, laugh, love, because they give us a recovery time, right? And God knows we need it.
Yeah.
We all, no matter if we're bored to tears or we're working crazy or we're somewhere in between, we need a break from this COVID-19 reality.
I wish I had known you 17 years ago when we did our second workbook, but I didn't know any of this you're talking about. But in my little mind, I thought, okay, we have stories of loss, and then can we create stories of growth? So we put together examples like Jen Page and different people, and then we connected them to our 8 resources, like what helped you get through, and embed it into that story and change it. And I also think that, so I'm not a big podcast guy, but people that know me know that I'm like, I have a little man crush on Adam Grant. Like, I think he's
Get in line.
yeah, exactly. Like, I, I don't know many people that can be that fun and smart at the same time, right? Like, I got fun down, but like, like he's like a Rolodex of like literature and research. In any case, today, when I was doing, taking a little time for myself, went for a run. I was listening to one of his latest podcasts, and I never knew this, but the word nostalgia, which is Greek, means the pain of not being able to connect to a previous experience or moment,
Ooh.
right?
Ooh.
Right. So thinking of it from a perspective of what positive stories have you had back in the day that you really want to reconnect to. But then the second step is thinking about what positive experiences you're having now and realizing that at some point you're going to lose those and feel nostalgic one day. So making sure you're getting in enough of this as much as possible as you can, and
Right.
appreciating that.
Right. And what that does is it puts you in the place of sort of actually changing the story moving forward.
Okay.
Because if I'm in a place of appreciation for the moment, because I know there's a poignant transiency to it, that one day I'm going to be nostalgic about something in this moment, right? It actually opens up the door to creating a different narrative moving forward, that I'm the kind of woman or the kind of man who holds her life as important, as significant, even if the story that I'm holding has to do with how the cat has been sheltered with me in the master bedroom for 9 weeks because the golden doodle is downstairs and the other cat's in the other part of the house, and my cat can't tolerate the competition.
Yeah.
And there's something insanely endearing about 4:30 in the morning, her jumping on the bed and saying, "It's my turn now, pay attention to me,"
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, once this all opens up again, she's going to get the run of the house because, God willing, the young adults are going to go back to their lives, right?
Yeah.
And take their pets with them. So the appreciation for the moment opens the door to a different narrative moving forward.
So that reminds me of, I knew there's a reason I want to talk to you. Two things. One thing what you just talked about is there are stories that we're holding on to. So you use those words, right? And then I think it's a matter of, is this story working for me or against me,
Yeah.
right? So what story are we holding on to? And the other thing is, we were talking to Jeff Hummel previously before we got on, who's a friend, Joy Zabin and I, and Joy Zabin is a friend who taught me always to ask myself, what story am I telling myself?
Right.
Right. And to check that.
Yeah. 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 Because our narratives can either be self-defeating or self-enlivening.
Yeah.
And the good news is, as an adult, you get to choose the narrative.
Yeah. So what story or stories are you connected to right now?
Well, I am uber connected to those compilations that musicians from around the world are putting together to raise money for COVID relief.
Yeah.
So there was one, the Foo Fighters just hosted one from UK musicians, and before that, I've been watching a lot of the Playing for Change videos.
Yeah.
And why? Well, first of all, because music hits you on every level: spiritual, physical, intellectual, relational, emotional, just like story does. Second, the thought that 30 different musicians who may not even like each other put aside all their political stuff to say, yeah, I'm going to devote time to learning this one song, even when I'm only going to have one line featured. Like, ego is like dropping, generosity is rising. So I'm fascinated by those stories. I'm also the story that actually feels like bread, like I'm nourished by it, has to do with human beings in the 15th century when the bubonic plague hit. And I don't know if we talked about this in the podcast, but in 1666, as the bubonic plague had already decimated Europe, it was heading into England. And there's a town 35 miles outside of Manchester called Eyam, E-Y-A-M, of about 300 villagers. And they know the plague is coming their way and there's no cure for it. Most of them are going to die. And under the guidance of their rector, they get together one day and they make a decision as a town that they're going to put border stones around the village They're going to allow no stranger in so that they will cause no harm to anyone else. And anyone who becomes ill in the village will die cared for and loved by people they've known since birth. And in the 14 months since the day they put the border stones around, 2/3 of the village died. But they died like deeply embedded in this shared meaning of generosity and courage and facing it together and not actually causing harm outside of themselves. And you can go there today and see the border stones and see the green crosses that mark the people who died that in those 2 years. And because of their action, other towns in the north of England did the same, and it slowed the progression of the plague throughout the north of England. Stories like that from centuries ago remind me, okay, COVID-19 is horrific, and we have navigated horrific times before, and we as a people, as a species, have risen. We can continue to do so.
Yeah.
So that's like my daily bread story these days.
Yeah. Yeah. That is a powerful one. And it's interesting because it's, that the circle of stones wasn't a selfish act of like, don't get us sick.
Right.
It was, let us care for ourselves and we'll support our community so then we don't hurt other communities.
Yeah. And they had to get permission from the Earl of the area to do so. And he granted them permission. And they carved, and the border stones are big, they're big stones. And they carved in the border stones these holes, and they dipped coins in the holes so that tradespeople could come and leave goods and food at the edge of the village. And in the holes, they poured vinegar, thinking, because the belief was that vinegar would prevent the coins from transmitting the plague. And so they were doing everything they could to protect people outside the village while honoring themselves. It's just a gorgeous story.
Yeah.
And, 9/11, there were stories like this. 2008, there were stories like World War I, World War II. We don't have to look too hard to be reminded that we are capable of astonishing goodness on behalf of ourselves and others.
I agree. And it's so easy now to find them. We just need to look. Like literally, I'm just big on like the growth through Christ. Like, what are the stories in our history? And oftentimes it takes a leader taking a risk in a positive way and going against a culture or something like that, which I think, look, I think that we can agree our political climate, whichever side you're on, is not the best, most healthy situation, especially during a crisis, right? So I think I'm done with people complaining about our leadership, and I want to take that on myself. It's like, how do I insulate my people from what's going on in DC or whatever? And I've got to take some ownership for like, I've stopped complaining about DC, and it's like, what am I doing within my sphere of influence and control to create positive stories or positive community?
Right. Exactly. And that's that shaping of your own narrative. That's that personal leadership piece that we know is so crucial for resilience, right? Like you can't be resilient and be a victim to the moment. You can feel like a victim in moments, and you can experience moments, of course, when you're on your knees and you're shattered.
Yeah.
And yet in order to cultivate resilience, there needs to be another part of you that you give permission to express, which is that personal leadership piece.
Yeah.
I'm going to hold the door for something a little better within me, something a little better outside of me.
So I a little bit of a geeky type of question. I go back and forth. Well, actually, I don't go back and forth. I have a point of view. I just don't know if it's right academically. So, there's Bonanno and the resilience, and you got Karen Rivich, all great stuff. I'm of the mind with resilience that there's a continuum. You're born with some of it, but you can absolutely develop it. And then you have like Bonanno saying like, well, if you have trauma, that means you're not resilient. I actually don't know if I don't agree with that perspective. I think that if you build up resilience, you're more likely to buffer different types of trauma. But I think sometimes you can get blindsided by something and it doesn't mean that you're not a resilient person. So correct me, let me know what your thinking is, because you've studied this much more recently than I have.
Yeah, I'm on your side of the coin. And my working assumption is that there are circumstances in life that would absolutely shatter every single one of us. And unfortunately, some of us face those circumstances that are almost like the perfect puzzle piece disaster scenario for you as a human being, right?
Yeah.
And so I feel like I have a much more um, sort of compassionate appreciation for trauma.
Right. Totally. I know. It's like, it's almost like, yeah, I agree with you. I think that now I will say in parallel, I'm absolutely focused on helping people build up resilience skills, because I do think you're more likely to grow. But then if you look at like what Tedeschi and Calhoun say with post-traumatic growth, they're like, you can't have post-traumatic growth unless you have a trauma. And so I'm not an academic. I'm more inclusive in like saying, okay, I'll just call it growth through adversity. So if you have adversity, you can grow, right?
Yeah.
A little loophole.
I think I would think about their research a little differently, which is that they looked specifically at people who had trauma to note growth. And, there's a question out there in the field, just like there's a question out there in life. Like I had a 24-year-old say the most endearing thing once. We were teaching a year of positive psychology, and she was definitely the youngest person in the room, and most people were middle-aged. And after like 9 months of study together, she raised her hand and she goes, so what I'm learning is that the bad stuff actually helps you grow. So maybe I should be looking for more difficult experiences, right? To which my response was, sweetheart, they're coming your way. You don't have to look for them.
Yeah.
Right? But there is always a question in humanity, and I get this often, is do we have to have terrible things happen in order to grow? And you know what, to be honest, for most of us, yes. Having said that, there are other kinds of life enhancing moments, like epiphanic moments, that come, I think, out of the territory of beauty in every form. Beauty of the human soul, beauty of a vision that, like that, dolphins cresting in the sunset kind of thing. The sudden turn, and suddenly you see the world differently because you've now heard something anew, or you're suddenly looking at the world through Monet eyes. Like there are transcendent moments that come in the larger sphere of beauty that I think also catalyze transformation. I don't know that it catalyzes resilience as much as it catalyzes a reservoir of, I think, hope within oneself.
Yeah. And I think that it's, I really advocate for people to build skills related to resilience. It's like insurance. No one wants to pay for it. But if you do, and you get into a car accident, you're going to be psyched that you have it. And there's less of an impact. So I kind of look at it as a cycle. When a crisis happens, everyone's like, send in the crisis counselors. Woo, right, like great. But no one deals with the before and the after. And it's so if we can do more of all three, I think we're better off. I mean, I had the fortunate aspect of when 9/11 happened, I was prepared. I was in a doctoral program in psychology. So I could understand what was going on, which was an incredible gift. So what am I saying? What I'm saying is, I believe that you can grow a lot more when you have a really difficult, adverse experience. I also believe we should all be trying to make ourselves stronger on a daily basis.
Yep. And if not for our sake, then for the ones we care for.
Right. For the ones that we care for, and kind of, and demonstrating that. So Maria, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you think would be helpful, or that you want to add to the dialogue?
I sometimes do this exercise with people. So it's just like, this is the pragmatic side of me, if that's okay.
Yeah. That's yes. I like that.
So I have sometimes people, I draw like a T, like you break a page into two columns, and column left is I basically suck and I don't deserve to live, kind of. And I have them write a story to that narrative. And it does not take people long to fill out that side of the column.
Yeah.
And then on the other side of the column, I ask them to write, I'm pretty much the bomb, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm awesome. Like
Yeah.
I'm not, the best, but I'm awesome, right? And that story often takes longer. What starts to happen though, after you've practiced that a couple of times, is you start to, first of all, realize how hardwired you might be for the negative self-regard story,
Yeah.
and how easy it is to access that information, how difficult it is to access the positive, number one. Number two, that as you start writing that positive, you start to realize, well, wait a minute, I actually have a choice in terms of what I believe. And then what starts to happen once you realize you have a choice is that over time, what starts to happen is an integrated view of yourself that's neither like I'm the bomb or I'm horrific, but rather I'm kind of human. I got some bad, I got some good. I kind of like myself anyway. And that's the place we actually want to be living in, right?
Yeah.
Neither extreme, but in the integration. And these was like leading from your strengths and integrating laughter and love. All of that helps with that integration of both.
Yeah. Do you have people have conversations with each other about their lists?
Sometimes it depends on the setting. In the old days before COVID, when we actually went on retreat together,
Right.
we would have those conversations.
Yeah.
Not always helpful, interestingly enough. Sometimes helpful, not always helpful, right?
I was thinking from a perspective as, does it make people, once they self-acknowledge, more empathetic to what other people might be thinking negatively about themselves?
Can be, that can be really helpful. The problem is, the extent to which you get seduced by other people's opinions, right?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
so that's just an element that we have to be thoughtful about when sharing these kinds of stories.
Yeah, totally. I haven't heard of that activity before, but I'm just going to focus on the right side and cut the paper in half. And
What a shock.
right.
What a shock. So David White. So I just want to take this one more step. So David White, who's this, do you know him? International poet, incredible orator, like world famous.
Okay.
And he has this beautiful phrase about becoming the steward of the lineage you most want to leave. So writing the stories that enable you to steward your life into the future, so that as you pass, you've left the lineage you want to leave for your ancestors, right?
Yeah.
And so doing these exercises, as simple and pragmatic and maybe as black and white as they sound, actually do enable us to live better lives.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a total believer in that. And part of the magic is, just the acknowledgement of like, these are just thoughts, just like emotions are just emotions. And it's our association and what we attach to them are
Right.
like, sometimes it can feel so heavy,
Yeah.
but if there's something we have during COVID, it's time to reflect, right?
Yes.
We're going to open up in a minute here to see if there are any questions. There may or may not be, but I learned this from our friend and colleague, Kathy Flavin. She says that you're always really good at having a question for people to think about. Now, I didn't ask you about this, so I'm going to put you on the spot, but is there a question you think that would be good for people that listen to this or watch this, would be good for them to think about?
Yeah. So a question I love is, imagine that it's your 90th birthday and your best friend has just come to tell the story of your life. What story do you want told?
Yeah.
And then what are the steps you need to take to get into that story?
I like it. So it's, you don't let them off the hook. It's like, so here's my last thing I'll say. All this stuff around why and vision, I had such a pet peeve. So I looked at some of the research on it, and there's a research in UCal Berkeley where they took a group of people, let's say group A, group B of students. And they said, group A, we want you to envision getting an A on your test. Group B, you're not doing anything. And so which group do you think did better?
Hopefully group A.
Group B. They found that group A got caught up in the emotions of like, I'm going to do so well and it's going to be great. And group B actually worked harder. So then they did group C, which was they say, we want you to envision how
The
to get.
how, right.
Then they talked about studying. So right to your point, I love it that you don't just leave it at like, oh, fine, the 80-year-old like friend says you're great, but like, how are you going to be great? Like, what are you going to do?
What
Sorry,
is
I
that?
get
Yep.
practical myself.
I love that.
So before I turn it over to see if there's any questions, any final thoughts, Maria?
No, that's good. I've got 3 more minutes and then I got a bolt. So let's see if there's a question.
You'll be out of here by 5:44. Let's see if there's a question.
Yeah, I'm going to stop recording.
All right.